Hi, welcome back to another Essex philosophy class. Remember that we've been talking about this topic of historicity. What does historicity mean? This means that we are historical beings. We are beings to whom history happens, but at the same time, we are also makers of history. We're not only undergoers of history, but makers of history. Let me just backtrack a little bit. The main point is that being a historical being is not something that's accidental. It's actually part of the structure of human existence. If you can phrase it in this manner, you could say that it's the way we are. It's the way we exist in the world. That's the way we're made, if you could put it that way. Okay, it's just that in earlier phases of human history, we weren't so aware of this fact. So you could say that this is part of the human condition. This part of the human condition that Sartre talks about. What are the components of the human condition? We exist in the world. We exist as bodies. We are embodied. We exist with other people. We are mortal, and then we have to work. Which brings me to one of our last points in the previous presentation. Like we said, we're no longer so focused on the past these days. We know that, the future, we have a keener awareness that the future is in our hands, that we are responsible for the future. However the future looks, that's going to be up to us. Think about it. I mean, take an issue like climate change. How the world would look in 10 years, or when you yourselves have your own families and kids, what kind of world would that be? That's going to be up to us now. That would depend on how we respond to this challenge, to this crisis. The same thing with this pandemic. Whether we're going to be successful in combating this pandemic, and whether we're able to save lives and then eventually, go back to some normalcy and get on with our studies, our work. That would depend on what we do now. Okay, so the future, we are more aware that the future depends upon us. And part of this awareness is this idea that it is really human work, it's really human effort that is the foundation of history. It is really, if you understand work as the transformation of the world into something that is human, that something, a world that accommodates uh, human desires and human needs, human ideals, then we we can understand that history, as something that we make, depends upon us. Okay, so we can, we can more clearly understand the human being as a builder of culture, a builder of a world that makes sense. I referred to this painting in the previous recording because I love this painting and what it could mean. That there's this woman who responds to something that's gonna happen to her, and how does she respond? By creating a work of art, creating something that would be part of culture, that would have meaning in the world that she lived in. Okay, so that's who we are. That's another meaning of being historical beings, that we are builders of culture. Now, In order to be able to understand this better, and in order to support the claim that we've always been historical beings, but it's just that we weren't always aware of the fact. Dundane, in his text, Historicity, he talks about our pre-philosophical experiences. What do we mean by pre-philosophical experiences? These are our ordinary, everyday experiences. The things that we do, the things that we undergo, that we experience before reflection, before philosophical reflection. Of course, we're going to talk about those experiences and subject them to a little bit of philosophical reflection and see what they could mean. But this is still, you can see that it's still part of the phenomenological approach, meaning, if we want to understand something, we describe our experiences, our human experiences. So, just to give an example, how do we understand history? What is history? We're able to answer these questions by looking at our pre-philosophical experiences. So, a simple example, using things, using implements, using tools, using, something as ordinary as eating implements. You probably, because most of you, if not all of you, are European, you're probably used to using a fork and a knife. No, but as you see, the fact that you use a fork and a knife, that means that you are part of, let's say, a family, first of all, that consists of people using these particular implements and not, let's say, chopsticks. And that also signals the fact that you're using a fork and a knife. That also signals that you're part of a culture where that is what is acceptable. That is how, food is eaten. At the same time, that means that you're not, like I said, you don't belong to a culture where what is more normal is the use of chopsticks, or in my case, for instance, in my country, we use a fork and a spoon. So the fact that you use things, you pick them up, you use them, you're able to name them, you learn the names of these things that you use. In this way, while we're only talking about things, you're also at the same time meeting other people. First of all, most immediately, your family, and then more indirectly through these objects, through these products and implements that we use, we also meet other people who made them, who used them in the past. And in a way, if we are going to continue using these implements and products, we are passing these on to the next generation. And so through these things, we are meeting, people in the future. Okay, we're passing on a tradition, a culture. So in using these things, you can already see that you can never really see yourself as somebody who's isolated. Your horizon is automatically, by default, expanded, because you are, from the very beginning, part of a family, part of a culture, part of a community. You are not alone. You're not isolated. Through these things, you are part of a bigger network of things, meanings, basically, fundamentally, a world that makes sense. Okay? And then it goes deeper. You start going to school, Here in the previous slide, we talked about when you were kids, you start learning, picking up a language, and then learning the names of things. Eventually, you would start going to school. You would have something like as a subject in school, history. You get your first you get your first understanding of history, and at quite a superficial rudimentary level, you understand history as the study of certain series of events. You memorize dates, important figures. You look for causes and consequences, things like this. So these are the typical things that you do in a history class. But then, if you try to understand all of these things that are delivered to you in the classroom that you're expected to learn, if you think about that, if you reflect on these things, you also realize that, you're talking about turning points. You're talking about great figures, great women and men. Now, if you reflect a little bit on these things, we can realize that, we can understand that, well, if there are turning points, then, that means some things, some major events could have come out otherwise. Other things could have happened. Other consequences could have emerged out of those events. So the thing is, history was made, decisions were made. Okay? And these great men and women, we consider them to be great, not because they simply underwent history, not because they were swept up by, major forces, events out of their control. No, it's because they're considered to be great because they were placed in a particular time and space. They were given challenges. They had to confront problems, and then they made decisions. Okay, as their response to those challenges, to those problems, and they were, to some considerable extent successful. That's why we consider them to be great. And then you can even go deeper. After this school year, after a couple of years, you'll find yourselves at higher institutions of learning at universities and or colleges, and then maybe some of you will still study a bit of history. And even now, if you think about what we're doing in philosophy, you will have a deeper experience of history, a more profound understanding of history, hopefully. Why? Because as we study, for instance, philosophy and the history of thought, of ideas, you are given the chance to actually engage great figures, great thinkers in a dialogue. When in your S6 history classes or S7 history classes, you deal with testimonies, diaries, newspaper articles, different kinds of documents, you are able to engage in a dialogue with people who were there or who witnessed those great historical events. So what another insight that this brings us is that this means that we can enter into a dialogue with the past on the one hand. Certain things, certain momentous, memorable things happened. These people were there. They responded to it. They wrote about it, or they were part of it. They made it happen in the past. Okay? And that gives you the idea that, again, people are creators of history. If these people were able to respond to their challenges, to their problems, to the problems of their time, in their own way, then it gives us this idea at the same time that we have that capacity as well. That given our own time, given the particular challenges that we face, we could formulate our own response. We could take action that is based on reflection, that is based on reason, that is based on the understanding that we can be sources of change, that we can bring about change that would be for the better. Okay? Now, I'll stop here. In the next recording, we are going to discuss what, according to Dundee, are the elements